Welcome to Woolsthorpe Manor. I'm Margaret Winn and I'm the Conservation Manager, and I'm going to take you on a tour of the manor today, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, you've just stepped in through the front door. The manor itself is a 17th century, typically Lincolnshire farmhouse. It's built of Ancaster stone and it has a Collyweston slate roof. It was built, we think, originally in around 1623 when Isaac Newton's grandfather bought it. We're not quite sure what state it was in, whether he rebuilt it or renovated what was here, but there has been a house on the site since the 13th century, and originally it was called Mortimer's Manor. So if you'd like to follow me into the parlour. It wasn't like a Victorian parlour that was shut off and only used high days and holidays. It was used. They would have used it to do their spinning and weaving in. Also, in Isaac Newton's father's will, in the inventory to his will, it said there were beds and chests in here, so that suggested they could put people up at short notice, possibly in this room. You'll notice it's got 3 windows, so you've got quite a lot of nice light in here. Well, it's a north-facing room. That's because the fireplace is over the corner. It was constructed over the corner, and the flues go up and then they go diagonally into this wall here, the north wall, because the chimneys are actually on the end of the house. The furniture in the house, we're trying to present it in about 1665, so when Newton was here. So the pieces of furniture are representing that time scale, although none of the furniture is of the Newton family. There is one piece that there's a query over, and that's the cupboard in the corner. A lady willed it to Woolsthorpe Manor and said it was always known in their family as Newton's cupboard and had been bought in Grantham Market. But unfortunately it has no provenance with it, so we can't really say it is Newton's, although it fits quite nicely in the corner, doesn't it? A lot of our furniture is on loan from the V&A, and we had quite a few new pieces in the winter last year. So we had this buffet and the lovely early gate leg table there, which are 2 nice pieces. Okay, so normally our tour now takes you upstairs, so if you like to follow me, we go back through the entrance hall. Interestingly, here we have, in 1947, etchings were discovered in the house under the plaster, just discovered by accident when the tenants actually lived in these historic rooms as their family rooms. And I think someone was changing the wallpaper and scraping away and found several figures on the wall. This one, we are fairly sure, if you look, there are 6 fingers here on a hand. And that 6 fingers on a hand is the sign of a witch. Now, you have to think back to the 17th century, and belief in witches was quite common. And you often find these sort of marks near doors or windows, and that just suggests that there's already a witch living here. So another witch that comes to the door won't want to move in. If you look up there, as we're going to go past another etching, that is believed to be a farm tally, where the farmer would have counted either his stock or how much corn or hay he got off a field. Originally this staircase was not here. This was put in late Georgian times, when it was fashionable to have a front hall and staircase. But the original staircase came up out of the kitchen, so this would have been a bedroom across to here. This is cut through a bedroom, which we'll see later, and that would be beside the farmer's bed, so they could easily whitewash over and reuse it, so it was very useful. Okay, so if you'd like to follow me upstairs, yes. And if you follow me into here, into the calico chamber, this is a very odd shaped little room, but you can now understand how they cut the staircase out, and this would have been a larger bedroom over to the wall where the farm tally was. This is called the calico chamber, and the names that we've used for the house we actually have taken from Hannah Newton's will, where she named rooms and what was kept in the rooms and what she was leaving in the rooms. We go into the red chamber. I'm just going to open the curtains. That's coming. It was here that we're told Newton was born, Christmas Day 1642, and we have a plaque over the fireplace. And a little epithet recorded by Alexander Pope later. It says, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light." Right, in here again you've got the fireplace going across the corner, and this time it's the other corner from the one downstairs, so that the flues go diagonally this way, and in front of the flue we have a little cupboard. It's called a book press, press being a Scottish word for cupboard. They would have either kept books in there because they would have been aired by the warmth of the fire going behind the books, and they would really have only had one or two books normally in a family. They would have had a family Bible, and in that they would have recorded all their own events, births, deaths, marriages would all have been recorded in that family Bible on the spare pages. So we're told this is where he was born, 1642. He was premature baby, not expected to survive, and in 1642 England was having very severe winters, so it had been very, very cold, lots of snow, and it's recorded that 2 servants were sent from the house to go to see a Lady Pakenham who lived in North Witham, which is 3.5 miles away. They would have gone over the fields and stiles, and they asked Lady Pakenham for something to help the baby because he was so small, and obviously they didn't think he would survive. And it's recorded that they didn't return straight away because they allowed themselves to rest on a stile, because they thought the baby would already have died, so there was no need to rush. We don't know what Lady Pakenham gave him or prescribed for him, but it would have been nice to know, because thinking about it, although he was premature, Newton survived to a great age, a good age for now, but in the 17th century, when life expectancy was sort of between 40 and 60, he was 84 when he died, so that was amazing. A lot of the time he treated himself. He didn't go to the doctors and the quacks of the time, and he was a little bit of a hypochondriac and made all his mixtures himself, so we wonder if that helped him keeping well away from the medical profession of the 17th century. It possibly made him survive a bit longer, we don't know. Recently I've written a new tour to go along with the original house tour, and it's called A Day in the Life, Hannah Newton's Diary, 1665, in August 1665. Hannah Newton was Newton's mother, and obviously when her husband died before Isaac was born, and then she was left here to run the house, so she would have been a very busy lady doing all sorts of jobs. In the red chamber where we're standing at the moment, which was Hannah's bedroom and probably the best room in the house, I wrote that she may have said in her diary, "Yesterday I bought a new comb, a hair clip and some pretty ribbons from the pedlar who visits us each year. He had frightful tales of the plague, spreading like wildfire from town to town, he said. I do pray we'll be safe here at Woolsthorpe. I must cut some sage from the herb garden and hang it in bunches around the house, as some say, it wards off this terrible pestilence. Right, so we're going to leave the red chamber now, and we'll go across to the hayloft and the hall chamber, if you like to follow me. Right, we're standing in the hayloft at the moment. Now, originally in Newton's time, this wouldn't have been accessible from the house, from the door that we just came through. It would have just been accessible from outside, through that door, through a set of steps from the outside. And it was where they would have kept their grain and their hay and all sorts of stuff. That's why everything that's represented in here is sort of in sacks and with hessian and various things. It's generally just a little bit of an information room, and on the walls are bits about the 17th century. Over there we've got people that influenced the young Isaac, people like his stepfather and his uncle William Ascough and Mr. Clark, who he lodged with in Grantham, the apothecary. It was Mr. Clark who really got Newton interested in mixing herbs and potions and all his herbal stuff, which led on to lots of stuff about alchemy that Newton was trying to do. Like a lot of people in the 17th century, they were really trying to find the secrets of the universe and were messing with alchemical things. So lots of bits about that, and really just to illustrate that the Newtons were yeoman farmers. Here we've got a structure of society in the 17th century. There'd be royalty, the aristocracy, the lower gentry, and then came this new line of people, and they were called yeoman farmers, and they were the first lot of people to own their own land without being the landed gentry. The hall chamber is the room that Newton used when he returned to the house from Cambridge just after, when the plague was happening, and he came home to Woolsthorpe to be safe, and he used the hall chamber as his workroom and his bedroom. What we're trying to show in here is a slight conflict of Newton's personality, that his personal life would be a bit chaotic. He's got up, he's left the bed all tumbled and unmade, the fire's gone out, he wouldn't let the servants in to make the fire, and yet if you look at his notation, any experiments that he's doing, it's all meticulously written down. So he's very, very preoccupied. And I did write another piece in my little tour that Hannah may have said. Isaac came home as the university closed last week, but he seems really distracted and stays in his room. The servants take him food, but he leaves it untouched. He works long into the night, staring at the moon and making lots of notes and calculations, which often end up all over the floor. He shouted at Nancy today for trying to tidy them up. He brought back with him a block of glass, which he calls a prism. It seems to have some kind of magic inside, because he says it bends the sunlight into colours. Actually, looking out here is interesting because you can see the apple tree, which of course, you know, the story of Isaac watching the apple fall, and that kind of joined up his thoughts and gave him his final answers to what he'd been trying to work out while he was at university, his thoughts on gravitation, and we'll go and have a look at the apple tree in a little while. He recorded some notes about splitting white light, which is what he did in this room. As we've learned, he brought with him a prism, and he used that window over there, which is south-facing, and he put the prism on the windowsill, and of course it split the colours into what he defined as 7 colours of the spectrum. So while he was here, he split white light. He wrote a lot of the work of his laws of motion, his 3 laws of motion, which later were collected into his very famous book, the Mathematica Principia. And he was just still a young man in his early 20s doing his most important scientific work. In fact, he said to his early biographers when they were in a garden in Kensington, and he said, "It was a day such as this at Woolsthorpe that occasioned my thoughts on gravity." And he also said that while he was here, he was in the prime of his age for invention, so he recognised that this was his important time when he was having all his scientific thoughts. I mean, he always was working, kept doing a lot of work, but the scientific stuff he did really early on. Later on, in fact, lots of people don't realise he did more work on religious studies and trying to crack codes in the Bible and stuff like that, and lots of other stuff in later life. So really interesting. If you look behind you, we have a portrait of Newton. This was painted by Sir James Thornhill, and it's one of 3 that was painted, and Newton is in his 70s. So quite interesting, because wherever you stand in the room, he's actually looking at you, which is supposed to be the sign of a good painter. And over here we have Newton's death mask. When people died, they made a waxen image of the face and then cast copies in pewter. And this is one that was bought by a lady who thought originally it was Charles II, and she was a great fan of Charles II. When she found it was Newton, she kind of lost interest, didn't want it in her collection, but happily gave it to us. So actually, if you compare the death mask and the portraits, it does give us an idea of what he looked like, because that obviously has been moulded on his face, and the portrait is quite a good likeness. If you'd like to follow me, we'll go downstairs and go into the hall. Right, we're now in the hall. Again, it's a nice light room, and this would have been the family meeting room where the family would have eaten. They would have met with their tenants in here, and the tenants would have paid rents, and I can imagine they would have all sat round the table and discussed their farm business and their family business, and it's quite nice to imagine it as a busy room, the centre of the house really. They would have always had a fire here. It would never have gone out. At night it would have just been taken down to ashes, and then someone possibly would have slept in there, a servant, to make sure the fire was always kept going and then get it burning quickly to be able to boil water for early in the morning. The lady of the house, Newton's mum or Newton's grandma, when she looked after him here, would have been the first ones up. They weren't like gentry that would have laid in bed until midday. They were up and directing the servants, so it would have been a busy life, and there would have been cooking going on in here all the time. The pot over the fire would have been a big stew, meat and vegetables, always carrying on, always going on. Have you heard the saying potluck? That comes from this time when, as I say, they're adding stuff to the pot all the time, so it was your potluck whether you got a carrot that had been in there 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks. It was just continuous. If you look over here, we've got 2 more etchings. Now these we do believe are Newton's, although as I said, he didn't sign anything. This one is a post mill, an early form of windmill that was just on a post, and they turned it into the wind, whichever way the wind was blowing, rather than having the top turning with the sails. There aren't any sails on this, but there would have been, but they're not on the etching. And Newton recorded in his notes that he saw windmills being built on the hill over there, and then he made a quick sketch, and then he made a working model, and he was quite happy with that, because he was, as well as all his thoughts tumbling, he was very good with his hands as well. But when he brought it into the house, of course there was no wind and the sails didn't turn, so the story goes on that he constructed a wheel, like a hamster wheel, and put a mouse in it and held food, and the mouse ran, and then the wheel turned the sails and he got the same effect, so he was pleased with that. The other one is a church. Now, we're not sure whether it's either St Wolfram's in Grantham, because remember he went to the King's School at Grantham, which was quite near St Wolfram's, or some people think it was Colsterworth Church before it lost its spire. Apparently Newton was fascinated by all things that pointed heavenward, spires and towers and that sort of thing, so he made the etching. And here you can see the construction of the house. It's reeds within the plaster, which is interesting. You can see that a little bit there. So if we go through to the kitchen from the hall, as I say, this part was reconstructed. This is later than Newton, although it is on the same site, and actually that beam over there over the fireplace, according to etchings that we've seen, I think they reused it. This would have been the working kitchen, where all the sort of dirty work would be done. You'd have had washing happening here, cleaning the wool and dyeing colours of wool. Baking would have been done here in the bread oven, and brewing, because a house like this they brewed regularly because the water wasn't safe to drink. It could have been contaminated by animals falling down the well. They certainly couldn't drink it safely, so everyone, including the children, drank what we call small beer, small ale, very, very weak ale, or fruit drinks, fruit teas, that sort of thing. Lots of reliance on herbs and potions, and the lady of the house, Hannah Newton, would have been responsible for looking after the people of her family, of her servants, and the people that lived in the rest of the area that worked for her. She would have had to sort of make their medicines and look after them. So this is where, again, they would have prepared meat and vegetables, and there's the old sink that is of the period, but obviously they hadn't connected it up to any drains. They'd use a bucket, and every drop of water that they used, if you can imagine it, they had to bring from the well and carry it, or from the stream, so I think they would be very careful with it. The bread oven, this one in particular is Victorian, but there would have been an oven on this site, and they would have baked 2 or 3 times a week. And what they did, they took the actual fire that they'd got burning in the fireplace and put it in the oven, and sealed the oven round with clay, and just left it to burn and to get the high temperature that was needed for the bread. And then they would open it, clean it out, and they'd cook bread first, then pastry, then pies, cakes, and down to sort of meringues and syllabubs and stuff like that that didn't need a high temperature. Hannah Newton's diary. Must remember to get Dorothy to polish the wood where that horrid tallow candle spat fat all over my nicely waxed table. The tallow smells so bad I shall only use the beeswax candles in here, and I shall put a bowl of lavender in the room. I did some spinning this afternoon using the long wool fleece. It is such good quality this year and will keep us very warm next winter. So if we go now and take a look at the tree and have a walk around the house and look at the outside. Here we are in the historic orchard at Woolsthorpe. We have quite a few fruit trees, pear and apple, and of course we have the famous apple tree connected with the Newton story. The story is that Newton actually said himself that he watched the apple fall and it gave him his final thoughts on gravity. The tree itself was generally looked after by the locals. It was propped up and a fence built round it, a bit like today actually, if you look at the willow round the tree, and it's got a prop under it. But unfortunately in 1820 it actually blew down in a gale, and I guess people came from far and wide and collected pieces off it and made all sorts of little bits and pieces, snuff boxes and various artifacts that they probably sold in Grantham Market. So they sort of left it for a while, and there was a piece of trunk still lying on the ground, and in about 1840 they realised that it was growing again. So it was actually put down new roots and it was regrowing, and it's actually now grown, as you see, and followed the shape that we have an etching of it in 1840, a very minor outline, but the shape, the sort of S shape, reversed S shape, you can see, and here it is today. Still growing, still having a good crop of apples most years, and we obviously still take great care of it. Hannah Newton's diary. The pig seems better this week. Hopefully the medicine of comfrey leaves will help to rear it. If it dies, we shall be short of meat this winter, and the children will really miss their favourite toy, which is the pig's bladder. It makes a very good ball for them to kick around the yard. Isaac showed me how to place a lens in front of the candle to give more light for my sewing. That boy has such strange ideas.